The receptionist looked at the black woman in the wheelchair, then laughed. Actually laughed. Right there in the middle of the lobby. Ma'am, the executive floor isn't open to visitors. Silence. Interesting. Very interesting. Because the woman wasn't a visitor. And within 10 minutes, half the building would discover that fact. The headquarters of Brooks Healthcare Systems occupied 27 floors of glass and steel in downtown Atlanta. The lobby alone looked expensive. Marble floors, polished brass fixtures, floor-to-ceiling windows. The kind of place designed to impress investors and intimidate everyone else. People moved quickly through the building. Executives carrying tablets, managers rushing between meetings, assistants juggling schedules. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone seemed important, at least from a distance. Interesting. Very interesting. Because sometimes the most important person in a building doesn't look important at all. At 9:17 that morning, a black woman in a wheelchair rolled through the front entrance. No entourage, no assistant, no security, no announcement. Just a woman. In a wheelchair. Her name was Vanessa Brooks. 52 years old. Sharp-minded. Quiet. Observant. And worth more money than most people in the building would earn in several lifetimes. Yet nobody recognized her. That wasn't unusual. It was intentional. Very intentional. Vanessa rarely appeared in public. Rarely gave interviews. Rarely attended company events. She preferred results over attention. For years, she had remained behind the scenes. The founder, the majority shareholder, the woman who owned 51% of Brooks Healthcare Systems. Interesting. Very interesting. Yet fewer than 20 employees could identify her on site. That fact had never bothered her. Until recently. Over the past year, anonymous employee surveys had started showing troubling patterns. Complaints. Concerns. Stories. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make Vanessa curious. And curious people ask questions. Smart people verify answers. That was why she was here. Not as an owner. Not as a billionaire. As an ordinary person. Or at least as ordinary as possible. She wanted to see how people behaved when they didn't know who she was. Unfortunately, she was about to get her answer. The receptionist's name tag read, Brittany Collins, 24 years old. Perfect hair. Perfect makeup. Perfect confidence. The kind of confidence that sometimes appears before wisdom arrives. Vanessa rolled toward the reception desk and smiled politely. Good morning. Brittany barely looked up. Name. Vanessa Brooks. The receptionist typed something. Paused. Then typed again. Nothing appeared. Because Vanessa had intentionally avoided scheduling an appointment. Interesting. Very interesting. The receptionist frowned. Who are you meeting? No one. Brittany finally looked up. The wheelchair caught her attention immediately. Then Vanessa's simple clothing. Then the absence of any executive credentials. A conclusion formed almost instantly. And it was the wrong one. Very wrong. I see. The words carried a different tone now. A colder tone. Vanessa noticed. Everything. The receptionist leaned back in her chair. The executive floors require authorization. I understand. Vanessa's voice remained calm. I'd still like to go upstairs. The receptionist laughed again. A little louder this time. Several nearby employees glanced over. Interesting. Very interesting. Because embarrassment always attracts an audience. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. Vanessa smiled. Patiently. I own stock in the company. Technically true. Very true. The receptionist smirked. So does my uncle. A few nearby employees chuckled. The woman in the wheelchair remained calm. Completely calm. Years of business negotiations had taught her something. People reveal themselves when they think they hold power. And Brittany clearly believed she did. The receptionist pointed toward a seating area. You can wait over there. Vanessa looked toward the elevators. Then back toward Brittany. I'd prefer to go upstairs. The receptionist's expression hardened. Noticeably. Ma'am. A pause. The executive floor is for investors. Silence. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Vanessa was, quite literally, the largest investor in the building. The irony would have been funny under different circumstances. Nearby, a young operations manager slowed his pace. His name was Marcus Reed. 31 years old. Bright. Ambitious. And observant. Very observant. He noticed the conversation immediately. Something felt wrong. Not enough to intervene. Not yet. But enough to watch. The receptionist folded her arms. Certain she had already won the interaction. You can't just show up here. Vanessa nodded slowly. I see. The words sounded simple. Yet Marcus noticed something. The woman wasn't angry. She wasn't offended. She was studying, listening, learning. Interesting. Very interesting. The way executives observe meetings. The way investors evaluate companies. The way owners assess culture. Without realizing it, Brittany was giving Vanessa exactly what she came for. The truth. Raw truth. Unfiltered truth. Then the receptionist made a mistake. A big one. She picked up her phone and called security. Several heads turned. Marcus stopped walking entirely. Now he was definitely paying attention. Yes. Brittany smiled. We have someone attempting to access executive areas without authorization. The words echoed through the lobby. Vanessa said nothing. Not one word. Security would arrive shortly. Employees were watching. And somewhere upstairs, a chain of events had already begun. Because Marcus Reed couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something about the woman's name sounded familiar. Very familiar. As security officers approached the lobby, Marcus pulled out his phone, opened the company ownership database, and typed 2 words. Vanessa Brooks. 5 seconds later, the color drained from his face. 5 seconds later, the color drained from Marcus Reed's face. Interesting. Very interesting. Because the name staring back at him wasn't just familiar. It was impossible. Vanessa Brooks. Founder. Board chair. Majority shareholder. Ownership stake, 51%. Marcus blinked, then looked again. The information didn't change. Neither did the photograph. The woman sitting calmly in the wheelchair across the lobby was the single most powerful person in the company. And security was walking toward her. Fast. Very fast. Meanwhile, Brittany Collins smiled confidently behind the reception desk, completely unaware. The receptionist still believed she was handling a difficult visitor, not confronting the owner. Interesting. Very interesting. Because arrogance and ignorance often travel together. The 2 security officers arrived moments later. Professional, polite, middle-aged, experienced. Neither appeared hostile. Neither appeared aggressive. Yet their arrival changed the atmosphere immediately. Employees slowed their pace. Conversations stopped. People began watching openly now, no longer pretending not to stare. Brittany pointed toward Vanessa. That's her. The words carried the satisfaction of someone who believed she had won. Interesting. Very interesting. Vanessa noticed that too. Everything. One security officer approached. Good morning, ma'am. The respect in his voice contrasted sharply with Brittany's tone. Vanessa smiled politely. Good morning. The officer glanced at the receptionist, then back at Vanessa. There seems to be some confusion. The woman in the wheelchair nodded. Apparently. No anger. No frustration. No accusations. Just observation. Marcus stood 20 feet away. Frozen. Completely frozen. Because he suddenly faced a dilemma. A serious dilemma. He could immediately expose the truth. Or he could wait and learn something. Interesting. Very interesting. Because leaders often discover more by observing than by intervening. Marcus wasn't sure which choice was right. Yet something told him Vanessa already knew exactly what was happening. The owner wasn't trapped. She was studying. The realization unsettled him. A lot. The security officer continued carefully. May I ask why you're here today? Before Vanessa could answer, Brittany interrupted. Immediately. She said she wants access to the executive floors. The officer frowned. Slightly. Okay. The receptionist folded her arms. Without authorization. The officer looked back toward Vanessa. The woman simply smiled. Still calm. Still composed. Interesting. Very interesting. Most people would have become angry by now. Most people would have demanded a manager. Most people would have created a scene. Vanessa Brooks had spent 30 years building a billion-dollar company. Compared to boardroom battles, this lobby felt remarkably quiet. The officer asked another question. Do you have an appointment? No. The answer was truthful. The receptionist smirked, as though that settled everything. Then came another mistake. A bigger mistake. She laughed. Again. Loud enough for nearby employees to hear. You see, several uncomfortable looks immediately appeared around the lobby. Even people who knew nothing about the situation could sense something felt wrong. Very wrong. Interesting. Very interesting. Because cruelty often announces itself before people understand why it feels cruel. Marcus finally started moving. Toward the reception desk. Toward the unfolding disaster. Yet he wasn't close enough yet. Not nearly close enough. Meanwhile, Vanessa noticed another employee nearby. A young woman carrying cleaning supplies. Housekeeping staff. Perhaps 50 years old. The woman looked nervous, embarrassed, ashamed of what she was witnessing. Their eyes briefly met. The housekeeper offered a tiny smile. Vanessa returned it. Interesting. Very interesting. Because kindness often comes from the people with the least power. Brittany never noticed. She remained focused on her performance. And that's exactly what it had become. A performance. For the audience gathering around them. The receptionist leaned forward. Honestly, I don't know why people think they can just roll in here. Silence. Complete silence. The comment landed badly. Very badly. Even the security officers exchanged glances. Interesting. Very interesting. Because everyone heard what she meant. Not what she said. What she meant. The woman in the wheelchair finally spoke. Calmly. As always. Do many people come here asking to see the executive floor? The question caught Brittany off guard. What? Many people? The receptionist laughed dismissively. No. Then why assume that's what I'm doing? For the first time all morning. Brittany didn't have an answer. Interesting. Very interesting. Questions are dangerous when assumptions are weak. The receptionist quickly recovered. Or thought she did. Because that's obviously what's happening. Vanessa nodded. Slowly. Thoughtfully. Almost as if recording the answer in her memory. Which, in a way, she was. Marcus was now halfway across the lobby. His pulse quickening with every step. He needed to stop this. Immediately. Yet every second revealed something important. Something valuable. Something uncomfortable. The company culture wasn't being exposed by Vanessa's identity. It was being exposed by the way people treated someone they believed had no power. Interesting. Very interesting. That realization would stay with him for years. Then Brittany made the worst decision of the morning. The absolute worst. She looked directly at Vanessa and said, Look. A pause. The executive floor is for investors, board members, and owners. Silence. A few employees visibly cringed. The security officers looked away, and Marcus nearly broke into a run. Because the irony was now unbearable. The woman being denied access wasn't merely an owner. She was the owner. The largest owner. The person whose signature could replace most of the leadership team. Interesting. Very interesting. Yet Vanessa remained calm. Almost impossibly calm. Then she asked one final question. A simple question. The kind that sounded harmless. Until people thought about it. If I wasn't in this wheelchair. Silence. The lobby became very still. Would this conversation be happening? Nobody answered. Not Brittany. Not security. Not the employees watching. Nobody. Because everyone suddenly understood the real question. And everyone understood the answer. Interesting. Very interesting. The silence lasted several seconds. Then a voice echoed from across the marble lobby. Loud. Urgent. Panicked. Stop. Heads turned instantly. Every head. Employees. Security. Visitors. Everyone. Marcus Reed was running toward them. Actually running. His tie loose. His face pale. His breathing uneven. And when Brittany saw the expression on his face, something inside her stomach dropped. Because Marcus wasn't looking at Vanessa like a visitor. He was looking at her like someone far more important. Much more important. Marcus finally reached the reception desk. Breathing hard. Eyes locked on Brittany. Then on the security officers. Then on Vanessa. And the first words out of his mouth changed everything. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Do you have any idea who you're talking to? The question echoed through the lobby. And suddenly, nobody moved. Interesting. Very interesting. Because moments of humiliation can be loud. But moments of realization are usually silent. Marcus Reed stood bent forward, trying to catch his breath. His tie hung loose. His face remained pale. The ownership database was still open on his phone. Still displaying the same information. The same impossible information. Vanessa Brooks. Founder. Chairwoman. Majority shareholder. Ownership stake. 51%. Interesting. Very interesting. Because less than 2 minutes earlier, Brittany Collins believed she was removing an inconvenience. Now Marcus realized she had been insulting the most powerful person in the building. Directly. Publicly. Repeatedly. The receptionist stared at him. Confused. Then annoyed. Marcus, what are you talking about? The operations manager looked at her. Then looked at Vanessa. Then back at Brittany. For a moment, he didn't know where to begin. Because how do you explain a disaster to someone who's still creating it? Interesting. Very interesting. The lobby remained frozen. Employees stopped pretending to work. Visitors stopped checking phones. Even the security officers seemed unwilling to interrupt. Everyone sensed something important was happening. Very important. Marcus finally swallowed. Then spoke. Carefully. Brittany. His voice sounded different now. More serious. Much more serious. I think you should stop talking. The receptionist laughed. Actually laughed. Again. The sound seemed almost unbelievable now. Why? Marcus stared at her. Incredulous. Completely incredulous. Because she still didn't understand. Not even a little. Interesting. Very interesting. Arrogance becomes dangerous when reality hasn't arrived yet. The receptionist folded her arms. Marcus. She's trying to get upstairs without authorization. The operations manager closed his eyes briefly. Just briefly. As if trying to summon patience. When he opened them again, he turned toward Vanessa. The woman remained. Exactly as she had been all morning. Calm. Observant. Silent. Studying everything. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Vanessa hadn't interrupted once. Not once. She wasn't interested in defending herself. She was interested in discovering who people became when they thought nobody important was watching. Marcus finally looked back toward Brittany. Then spoke clearly. Very clearly. She's not unauthorized. Silence. The receptionist frowned. What? Marcus repeated himself. Slower this time. She's not unauthorized. The security officers exchanged glances. Several nearby employees leaned closer. Nobody wanted to miss whatever came next. Interesting. Very interesting. Because human beings are naturally drawn to truth the moment it begins emerging. Brittany shook her head. Marcus, I checked. No. His voice cut through hers immediately. You didn't. The words landed harder than expected. The receptionist blinked. For the first time all morning, uncertainty appeared. Only briefly. But it appeared. Interesting. Very interesting. Because confidence collapses quickly when facts arrive. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket. The ownership profile remained visible. He stared at it for one final second. Then looked toward Vanessa. The woman simply nodded. A small nod. Nothing more. Yet somehow Marcus understood. She wasn't asking for protection. She wasn't asking for rescue. She was giving him permission to tell the truth. And truth was long overdue. Very overdue. The operations manager turned back toward the lobby, toward the gathering crowd, toward Brittany, then finally said it. The sentence. The one sentence that changed everything. That's Vanessa Brooks. Silence. Complete silence. Nobody reacted. Not immediately. Interesting. Very interesting. Because some names carry weight only after people recognize them. The receptionist frowned. Still confused. Okay. Marcus stared at her. Disbelief written across his face. You know? A pause. The Vanessa Brooks. Nothing. Still nothing. Then realization began spreading through the crowd. One employee gasped. Another whispered something. A third employee's eyes widened dramatically. Interesting. Very interesting. Because recognition moves through groups like electricity. One person understands. Then another. Then another. And suddenly everyone understands. The receptionist's expression slowly changed. Confusion. Doubt. Recognition. Fear. Her eyes shifted toward Vanessa. Then toward Marcus. Then back toward Vanessa. No. The word escaped automatically. A reflex. Not a conclusion. No. Marcus nodded. Yes. The lobby became completely silent. Even the elevators seemed quieter. Interesting. Very interesting. Because reality had finally arrived. And reality was devastating. The receptionist's face lost color. Fast. Very fast. The same way Marcus's face had moments earlier. She looked again at the woman in the wheelchair. The simple clothes. The calm expression. The patient smile. Everything suddenly looked different. Not because Vanessa had changed. Because Brittany's assumptions had. Interesting. Very interesting. The security officers stepped backward. Almost instinctively. One immediately lowered his notepad. The other cleared his throat awkwardly. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew where to look. Then Marcus delivered the second sentence. The one nobody would forget. The sentence that would be repeated throughout the company before lunch. She owns 51% of Brooks Healthcare. Silence. Absolute silence. The kind that feels physical. The kind that presses against your chest. The kind that makes people hear their own heartbeat. Interesting. Very interesting. Because just moments earlier Brittany had explained who belonged on the executive floor. Now she discovered she had been explaining ownership to the owner. The receptionist looked physically ill. Actually ill. Her hands trembled. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. No words came out. None. Vanessa watched quietly. Not satisfied. Not triumphant. Just sad. Very sad. Marcus noticed immediately. Interesting. Very interesting. Most people imagine power feels victorious. Real power often feels disappointed, especially when it confirms exactly what you feared. The crowd continued growing. Employees emerged from hallways. Managers appeared from offices. News traveled upward through the building. Fast. Very fast. A founder was downstairs. An owner was downstairs. And she had just been publicly humiliated in her own lobby. Then something happened that surprised everyone. Vanessa spoke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just softly. Almost gently. Thank you, Marcus. The operations manager nodded. Still embarrassed. Still shaken. Because he couldn't stop thinking about one thing. If he hadn't checked the database, how much worse would this have become? Interesting. Very interesting. Vanessa then looked toward Brittany. The receptionist couldn't meet her eyes. Not anymore. The woman who had seemed powerless 30 minutes earlier now represented everything. The company. The board. The future. The receptionist expected anger. Expected punishment. Expected humiliation. Instead, Vanessa asked a question. A single question. The same kind of question she had asked all morning. Simple. Quiet. Dangerously honest. If you didn't know who I was. A pause. Why didn't you treat me with respect anyway? Silence. The question settled over the lobby. Heavy. Unavoidable. Because everyone knew the answer mattered far more than ownership. And before anyone could respond, the executive elevators opened. Several senior executives rushed into the lobby. Their faces tense. Their pace urgent. Because upstairs, an emergency meeting had already begun. And what happened next would shake the entire company. And what happened next would shake the entire company. The executive elevators opened. 5 senior executives stepped into the lobby. Then another 3. Then 2 more. Interesting. Very interesting. Because people move very quickly when they discover the owner of the company has been publicly humiliated in the front lobby. The atmosphere changed instantly. The executives weren't walking. They were hurrying. Actually hurrying. Something employees almost never saw. The first to arrive was David Mercer, Chief Executive Officer. 58 years old. Polished. Respected. Normally impossible to reach without 3 layers of assistance. Today he looked alarmed. Very alarmed. The moment he saw Vanessa Brooks sitting quietly in her wheelchair, he stopped. Then, immediately walked toward her. Ms. Brooks. Silence. Interesting. Very interesting. Because the entire lobby had just received confirmation. Not from Marcus. Not from a database. From the CEO himself. David extended his hand. Vanessa accepted it politely. Nothing dramatic. Nothing theatrical. Yet the impact was enormous. Several employees visibly froze. One visitor actually dropped a folder. A security officer took a step backward. The receptionist looked like she might faint. Interesting. Very interesting. Reality had fully arrived now. And reality was brutal. David looked genuinely concerned. I'm very sorry. Vanessa smiled softly. Not warmly. Not coldly. Just sadly. A smile from someone whose suspicions had been confirmed. The CEO immediately understood. This wasn't simply an embarrassing misunderstanding. This was evidence. Evidence Vanessa had come looking for. And unfortunately, she had found it. The executives gathered around her. Not because she demanded it. Because she owned 51% of the company. And because everyone knew what that meant. Interesting. Very interesting. Power rarely needs to announce itself. Everyone else announces it for you. Across the lobby, Brittany stood frozen behind the reception desk. Her hands trembled. Her breathing felt uneven. Nothing made sense anymore. 30 minutes earlier, she had believed she was protecting company policy. Now the CEO was apologizing to the woman she had mocked. The owner. The founder. The person whose name appeared on the building. Interesting. Very interesting. Because assumptions feel intelligent right up until reality arrives. David turned toward the security officers. His expression remained professional, but firm. Very firm. You can stand down. Both officers nodded immediately. Relieved. Actually relieved. Neither had wanted the situation to escalate. Neither had been comfortable from the beginning. They simply followed instructions. Instructions that never should have existed. Vanessa watched everything. The reactions. The fear. The panic. The embarrassment. Every detail. Yet none of it seemed to satisfy her. Marcus noticed. Again. Interesting. Very interesting. Most people imagine moments like this feel victorious. They don't. Not when they reveal a deeper problem. David finally asked the obvious question. What happened? Silence. Nobody wanted to answer. Nobody. The lobby remained completely still. Then Vanessa spoke. Calmly. As always. The receptionist believed I didn't belong here. No accusation. No exaggeration. Just facts. Somehow that made it worse. Much worse. Because everyone could hear the simplicity. And simplicity leaves nowhere to hide. Interesting. Very interesting. David slowly turned toward Brittany. The young receptionist immediately lowered her eyes. Unable to maintain eye contact. Unable to maintain anything. The confidence from earlier had vanished completely. The transformation was astonishing. 30 minutes. That was all it took. Interesting. Very interesting. The CEO took a breath. Then another. Trying to remain composed. Trying to understand how something like this could happen. In his building. Inside his company. To the founder herself. Then Vanessa asked a question. A simple question. The same kind she had asked all morning. The kind impossible to escape. If I didn't own this company. Silence. Every executive listened. Every employee listened. Every person in the lobby listened. Vanessa continued. Would anyone here have treated me differently? The words landed harder than any accusation ever could. Interesting. Very interesting. Because nobody could answer. Not honestly. Not after everything that had happened. David looked down. Marcus looked away. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Even Brittany started crying. Quietly. Almost silently. The question wasn't about ownership. It wasn't about authority. It wasn't about wealth. It was about dignity. And everyone understood that. Very clearly. The lobby remained silent for several seconds. Then Vanessa spoke again. Softly. I didn't come here to test a receptionist. A pause. I came here to test our culture. Complete silence. Interesting. Very interesting. Because suddenly everyone understood what this really was. An audit. Not of finances. Not of operations. Of character. And the company had failed. Badly. David closed his eyes briefly. The statement hit him harder than any quarterly report ever had. Because reports can be corrected. Culture is harder. Much harder. Vanessa slowly turned her wheelchair toward the employees gathered nearby. The housekeeping worker. The security officers. The assistants. The managers. The people nobody usually notices. Interesting. Very interesting. Because those people often know the truth before executives do. The founder looked at them carefully. Then asked, how many of you have seen something like this before? Silence. Nobody moved. At first. Then something unexpected happened. A hand slowly rose. Housekeeping. The woman carrying cleaning supplies. Another hand followed. An assistant. Then another. Then another. Interesting. Very interesting. Because truth becomes contagious once the first person speaks. The lobby changed. Completely. The problem was suddenly larger than Brittany Collins. Much larger. Vanessa saw it immediately. David saw it too. The executives exchanged worried looks. Not because employees were speaking. Because employees had been silent for so long. That realization frightened leadership more than the incident itself. Interesting. Very interesting. Then Brittany finally spoke. For the first time since learning the truth. Her voice cracked. Barely audible. I'm sorry. The words echoed weakly through the lobby. Vanessa looked at her. Really looked at her. Not as an owner. Not as a billionaire. As a human being. The receptionist continued. Tears now visible. I judged you. A pause. And I was wrong. The lobby remained silent. Waiting. Watching. Listening. Then Vanessa nodded. Not accepting. Not rejecting. Simply acknowledging. Because apologies matter. But accountability matters too. Very much. The founder turned toward David. Her expression calm. Resolved. Certain. Then she delivered the sentence that sent a chill through every executive in the room. We need a full cultural review. Silence. Interesting. Very interesting. Because everyone knew exactly what those words meant. The investigation was no longer about a receptionist. It was about the entire company. And before the week was over, Brooks Healthcare Systems would be forced to confront truths it had ignored for years. Before the week was over, Brooks Healthcare Systems would be forced to confront truths it had ignored for years. And that was exactly what happened. Interesting. Very interesting. Because problems rarely begin the day they're discovered. Most begin years earlier. When people stay silent. When leaders stop listening. When culture slowly drifts away from values. 1 week after the lobby incident, the results of the cultural review began arriving. Hundreds of employee interviews, thousands of survey responses, years of complaints, years of observations, years of silence. Interesting. Very interesting. Because once people finally believe they'll be heard, they start telling the truth. Vanessa Brooks spent hours reading every report, every statement, every testimony, every concern. The stories weren't always dramatic. Most weren't. They were smaller than that. An employee dismissed, a patient ignored, a worker overlooked, a voice silenced, one moment at a time, one decision at a time, one assumption at a time, until a culture forms. Interesting. Very interesting. Because culture isn't built by mission statements. It's built by daily behavior. And Vanessa didn't like what she was seeing. Not anymore. Several executives expected immediate firings, public punishment, examples made. Instead, Vanessa chose something different. She chose change. Real change. The harder kind. The lasting kind. 3 weeks later, every employee in the company received an invitation. Mandatory attendance. All departments. All locations. A company-wide town hall. Nobody knew exactly what would happen. Rumors spread quickly. Very quickly. Interesting. Very interesting. Because uncertainty always creates rumors. The auditorium filled long before the event started. Executives sat beside receptionists. Managers beside janitors. Nurses beside administrators. No special sections. No reserved rows. Just people. Hundreds of people. All waiting. Then Vanessa rolled onto the stage. The room immediately became silent. Complete silence. Not because she demanded it. Because she had earned it. Very differently than most leaders. She reached the center of the stage, looked around the room, and smiled. Softly. The same smile people had seen in the lobby. The smile that remained calm even when others weren't. Interesting. Very interesting. Then she began speaking. Not as an owner. Not as a billionaire. As a human being. As many of you know. A pause. I visited our headquarters without identifying myself. The audience remained completely still. Vanessa continued. I wanted to see who we really are. Another pause. And what I found disappointed me. Nobody looked away. Nobody checked their phones. Nobody whispered. Interesting. Very interesting. Because honesty commands attention in ways power never can. Vanessa spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Not about Brittany. Not about blame. Not about embarrassment. About dignity. Respect. Character. The responsibility people have toward one another. Especially when no one important is watching. Then she said something that many employees would remember for years. The true measure of a company, a pause, is how it treats the people who appear to have the least power. Silence. Powerful silence. The kind that makes people think. Really think. Interesting. Very interesting. Because everyone knew exactly what she meant. The woman in a wheelchair. The janitor. The receptionist. The patient. The visitor. The applicant. The stranger. The people easiest to overlook. The people easiest to judge. The people most in need of dignity. Then Vanessa announced major changes. New employee advocacy programs. Expanded accessibility initiatives. Leadership accountability reviews. Anonymous reporting protections. Mandatory empathy and inclusion training. Independent culture audits. The list was extensive. Very extensive. The audience listened carefully. Because everyone could tell these weren't temporary fixes. They were permanent commitments. The company was changing. And not because of a public relations crisis. Because it needed to. Interesting. Very interesting. After the meeting ended, employees slowly began leaving. Many looked thoughtful. Some emotional. Others relieved. Especially those who had spent years feeling invisible. One person remained seated. Brittany Collins. The receptionist. She hadn't moved. Not once. Vanessa noticed. As she always noticed everything. The founder quietly rolled toward her. The massive auditorium was nearly empty now. Just the two of them. And a few staff members cleaning up. Brittany stood immediately. Nervous. Very nervous. Her eyes filled with tears almost instantly. Interesting. Very interesting. Because some lessons arrive all at once. I don't expect forgiveness. The words came out shaky. Honest. Vanessa listened. Silently. Brittany continued. I thought I was judging a visitor. A pause. Then she shook her head. No. Another pause. I was judging a person. The admission hung in the air. Heavy. Real. Vanessa nodded slowly. Because for the first time, The young woman truly understood. Not what happened, why it happened. And that mattered. A lot. Interesting. Very interesting. The founder finally spoke. People make mistakes. Brittany looked up. Hopeful. Just slightly. Vanessa continued. The question is whether they learn from them. Tears rolled down Brittany's face. Not dramatic tears. Honest tears. The kind that appear when someone finally confronts themselves. The receptionist would remain with the company. Not because nothing happened, because growth was possible. But she would also spend the next year volunteering in Brooks' healthcare community outreach programs. Meeting patients, families, people living with disabilities, people from backgrounds different from her own. Learning. Really learning. Vanessa believed accountability should create improvement, not simply punishment. Interesting. Very interesting. Months passed. Then more months. The story faded from public memory, as stories usually do. But inside Brooks Healthcare, the culture slowly changed. Employees reported concerns more often. Managers listened more carefully. Accessibility improvements expanded nationwide. Trust increased. Not instantly, but steadily. One decision at a time. One interaction at a time. One person at a time. Then one afternoon, nearly a year later, Vanessa returned to headquarters. Again without an announcement. Again without publicity. Old habits. Interesting. Very interesting. The lobby looked the same. The marble floors. The glass walls. The reception desk. Yet something felt different. Warmer. Better. Near the entrance, an elderly woman using a wheelchair entered the building. She looked nervous. Uncertain. Holding paperwork in trembling hands. Immediately, someone stood. Brittany. The same receptionist. But not the same person. Not anymore. She walked around the desk. Approached the woman. Then did something simple. Something powerful. She lowered herself to eye level. Smiled warmly. And said, "Welcome." A pause. "How can I help you today?" The older woman smiled with visible relief. The tension disappeared from her face instantly. Interesting. Very interesting. Because dignity often arrives through small moments. Not grand speeches. Not headlines. Just kindness. Vanessa watched from across the lobby. Quietly. Unnoticed. The same way she had watched a year earlier. Only this time, she saw something different. Growth. Real growth. The kind money can't buy. The kind policies alone can't create. The kind people choose. One interaction at a time. Then Vanessa smiled. A genuine smile. The kind that reaches the eyes. Because she hadn't changed the company through power. She had changed it through truth. And perhaps that was the lesson all along. The receptionist mocked a black woman in a wheelchair. But in the end, the woman taught an entire company what respect actually looks like. And that lesson became worth far more than 51% ownership.